The creation of the United States was one of the largest experiments on human freedom that has ever been conducted in human history. The result of this experience was an unfathomable amount of wealth creation, one of the largest periods of prosperity, growth, and human thriving that this world has ever seen. However, the conditions that led to so much prosperity by many measures are dwindling, decreasing, and downright disappearing in the United States today. This country is on the road to serfdom, but do not despair because there is something you can do about it. Ready? Let's dive in. The reviews have started pouring in for my portfolio allocation course, and I'm not joking. Every single review that has come in so far has been 5 stars. And if you are on the fence about jumping into this course, today is the last day for the 40% off sale. Link is in the description below. There's a quote that I cannot find, and I'm definitely misquoting it here, but it's something to the effect of, the things that politicians proclaim loudest and most frequently are the least true. And so in the case of the United States of America, there's probably nothing truer than that than freedom. We hear freedom proclaimed from the rooftops. We're constantly talking about freedom and liberty here in the United States, but by many measures, the United States freedom is no longer where it used to be. In fact, there are many countries that are far more free than the United States of America. Take, for instance, this ranking from freedomhouse.org, a left-leaning organization that shows over the years 2010 to 2020, the United States declined by 11 points in its freedom ranking. Or if we look at worldpopulationreview.com, which ranks freedom of a country on things like rule of law, movement, the size of governments, association, and freedom to trade internationally, the United States does not even make the top 10 countries. And if you'd like a ranking from a more right-leaning organization, we can take a look at heritage.org, where they have their index of economic freedom that they list every country every single year, ranking them on things like rule of law, government size, regulatory efficiency, and open markets. Combining total scores, we can see that the United States does not even make it into the free section, which would need a score of over 80. And scrolling down, we notice it's not in the top 10, it's not even in the top 20, with the United States coming in with a rank of 25. Now we can see here that since the 90s, the overall world has trended higher on these freedom scores. We have moved as a world on average from mostly unfree to moderately free over the last 25 years or so. However, when we compare this versus the United States, we can see that the United States clearly peaked back here in 2005 through 2007 and has been severely declining since then. So by many measures, the United States is moving further and further away from being a free country. So what can be done about it? Well, the classic response to this is people just saying, well, if you don't like it, why don't you just leave? Well, first of all, we've clearly been able to see by now that there are plenty of places you can go around the world where there is more freedom. But it's not as simple as that. People, by using the phrase, why don't you just leave, are implying the social contract saying, hey, by you staying here, you are accepting the conditions and you are agreeing to them. But let's take a step back for a moment using taxes as an example here. Most people dislike paying taxes because, number one, it means that their labor is going to pay for somebody else. They're getting wealth transferred away from them, number one. And number two, they have no choice in the matter. And number three, they don't even get to choose what services they get in return for that money. All taxes considered, many Americans work over half the year just to pay the government. Now, if this were a social contract, that would imply that there is agreement, that the rules and the terms have been clearly laid out, and somebody looked and said, yes, I agree to this. And if that did not happen, and you are forced to anyway, that means that it is not a contract if there was no choice to opt out. If I have no ability to choose an alternative alternative to government services, and I must pay into the monopoly whether I use those services or not, it's not a contract, it's coercion. And this is where we see how the ability to opt out is, by nature, what creates freedom. In order to understand why, let's take a trip back in time to the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. We all know the story that God placed a tree in the middle of the Garden of Eden and said, "This is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Do not eat from this tree." They ended up eating from the tree and were banished from the Garden of Eden, and that was classified as the first sin. What is highlighted in this story, which is the genesis, the beginning, the origin of mankind, is that for good, for morality to exist, there must be the choice to do evil. That's why the tree was placed there, because if there was no option to do evil, there is no possibility for good. If you look at a rock and you command the rock to stay put and not move, is it being moral? Is it a good rock? No, it has no choice. It's going to stay there. But if you tell a toddler to sit down in their seat and stay there, and they listen to you and don't get down, is that a good moral toddler? Absolutely. The ability, not the action, but the potential to choose otherwise is what freedom is, and it is what creates good. You cannot have good without it. And by eliminating the possibility of evil or bad things from happening, you end up with either robots, infants, or slaves. But let's fast forward a little bit through time and get to more of the common era where people were talking about rule of law versus rule of man. Who has the right to tell other people what to do? Because at the end of the day, pure freedom is having zero restriction on what you are able to do and what you are able to do with others who also agree. But the basis of this is private property rights, meaning that I have all the rights I want. There are no limits to my rights unless I'm infringing on somebody else's rights, which comes down to private property. I might want to go take that land, but if it belongs to somebody else, I can't. And so many times throughout history, in order to safeguard these rights resting on private property, people have established rulers in order to make sure that these rights were not infringed. But now we enter into a problem, because as soon as you allow somebody the power over other men, now you have the potential for that power to be abused. This is why rule of law is so important, because rule of law says we're all going to agree on the rules that we're going to play by, and we're just going to put somebody in power in order to enforce those rules. Again, that we all agreed on. This means that it eliminates the ability for that person in charge then to abuse their power, because the only thing they are allowed to do is enforce the rules that were already set up, regardless of who's in power. And this is the fundamental reason why something like the Constitution is so important to a functioning nation, because it lays out the rules of what the rulers are able to do or not able to do. For instance, when we see written in the beginning of the Constitution that all legislative powers are vested in a Congress of the United States, that means that the only people who are allowed to make laws and regulations and dictate what people do in their lives are the elected officials that make up the Congress. So with the establishment of agencies like the FDA, the SEC, the ATF, the FBI, the CIA, NSA, the EPA, the FTC, and the BLM, all made up of unelected officials that make decisions that are laws and regulations that are enforced on Americans, we no longer have a system built on rule of law. We have moved into rule of man, where people can decide what laws and regulations are going to be in place, regardless of what the original rule book, the Constitution, says is okay. But beyond morality and what is right, does it have any practical effects? The answer is absolutely unequivocally yes. Freedom is the precursor to wealth. And we're going to go through this and I'll demonstrate that step by step. Number one, the point of a law is to change behavior. If a law is put in place and no behavior is changed, that law is inert and doesn't do anything and might as well be disregarded or eliminated. So laws and regulations change behavior. In absence of that law or regulation, the behavior would be different. So that's number one. Number two is that free action taken by choice is by definition profit, because all values are subjective, not objective. And so when I go through my day and I decide I'm going to drive somewhere, and then I'm going to buy some food, and then I'm going to go out on a date, and then I'm going to play with my kids, and I'm going to do whatever I want throughout that day, I am making a choice to do something, engage in some action beyond any other choice possible, because I want that, all things considered, more than I want anything else. And so when I go to In-N-Out, the best burger restaurant in the world, and I buy a burger, I want that burger more than I want my $5. The burger is not objectively more valuable than the $5, and the $5 is not objectively more valuable than the burger. I want that one burger more than I want my $5, and In-N-Out wants my $5 more than they want that burger. We both profit. If it was objectively so, I would buy all the burgers with all my money, but I only want 4 burgers or 5 burgers, and after that, I'd rather have more money than more burgers. And so the ability of individuals to exchange and act freely without restriction is the precursor, is the condition that allows wealth to be created maximally, because you allow free exchange to happen, which produces maximum profits, because every single individual actor is acting in a way that maximizes their own individual subjective values and profits every single moment of the day. And by doing so, the entire system maximizes its wealth. Therefore, if laws change behavior and free behavior maximizes wealth, then laws by definition decrease wealth. That means the less free a society is, the less wealth it can create. So what to do about it? That's the question. Well, number one, recognize that at the end of the day, we always do have a choice. As much as we like to point fingers and say, I can't because of that, or I wish I could, but that, at the end of the day, we really always do have a choice. And the situation we are in because of the actions that we've taken. So choose freedom and do not be controlled by anything. Do not be a slave. Humans are created to prosper in freedom and liberty and make choices and be masters of their own fates, not be slaves to somebody else's decisions. The first way to do this is by avoiding dangerous debt. Now, I'm a huge fan of debt in the right way, but debt is like a weapon. You can use a weapon for really good things. You can go hunting with it, but they're also very dangerous. So you want to make sure you know how to use it before you use it. And then once you know how to use it, make sure you're using it in the right way. Use fixed rate debt, not variable rate debt. Make sure that whatever you're using to buy with that debt will pay for the debt and then some. Otherwise, it's dumb. And if that's difficult, there's nothing wrong with staying away from it, because ultimately the borrower is slave to the lender, and we're not supposed to be slaves of anybody. We're supposed to be masters. So control debt, don't get controlled by it. Number two, your job. Many people are in a situation where they feel like slaves every single day, clocking in, clocking out, doing a job they hate, and they feel like they have no choice. In fact, for me, every single job I ever had in my life, I felt like a slave. I felt stuck. I felt like I had to show up and had to do the work that I didn't want to do. But guess what? I chose different, because I didn't want to be a slave to anybody. I wanted to make those things a slave to me. I didn't want to be controlled by a company. I wanted to control a company. And this is where personal money management is so important, because if your finances are controlling you and dictating the decisions you're able to make, you're a slave to money. Don't be a slave to money. Make money a slave to you. It's a tool. Use it, get control over it, and be its master, not the other way around. And then finally, the government. The one entity on earth with a legal monopoly on violence. At the end of the day, we are on a path that if we continue, we will be an entire nation enslaved by a bureaucratic political class, extracting the wealth from the entire nation for their own benefit. But guess what? We always have a choice. The more we push back and exercise our own freedom, create our own wealth to fight this system of tyranny, the better off we'll be. And at the end of the day, if we lose, guess what? We're not stuck. America as a country was created because it was so attractive that when the rest of the world fell to pieces, people came to America because it represented the place that was freest on earth, the place with the most opportunity. And the moment that becomes no longer the case, we can go anywhere we want. Yes, you might have to save up and get an additional passport somewhere. Yes, you might have to save up to buy a property somewhere else to apply for residence. Yes, you might have to make some difficult decisions and it might be a process in order to get there. But at the end of the day, we are never really stuck. We've already seen there are plenty of places on earth that are more free than the United States today. And the worse it gets, the more attractive those places will become. And the more attractive they become, the better they'll be, because freedom equals the ability to have morality. Number two, the wealthier they will be because number one, they'll attract the wealth. And number two, they have all of the conditions for wealth creation to be possible. And really, who could ask for anything more? So be a human, be good, choose freedom, exercise choice, and create wealth. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.